One of the most controversial American operations in Vietnam.
Just the name of it evokes all sorts of horrible images. Agent Orange.
During the Vietnam War, Americans were told that spraying millions of acres of dense jungle with Agent Orange would deprive the Viet Cong of cover and save GIs' lives. But in the decades since, the herbicide's use in Vietnam has been blamed for creating a human catastrophe among veterans.
I died in Vietnam and didn't even know it.
And the Vietnamese.
Vietnam is convinced that these children are just the latest victims of the deadly chemical dioxin in Agent Orange.
Now, more than 40 years later, the fight over Agent Orange continues to take new turns. During the Vietnam War, the U.S. military fought an invisible enemy. Viet Cong fighters who quickly attacked, then slipped back into the dense jungle. In 1962, American forces responded with Operation Ranch Hand. Over the next 9 years, spraying an area about the size of Massachusetts with defoliants, the most notorious being Agent Orange.
It was one way we were going to win the Vietnam War, dump herbicides all over the jungle so the Viet Cong would come out and fight.
To both expose Viet Cong hiding places and deprive them of life-sustaining crops, large swaths of Vietnam were left barren.
Enough food to feed 600,000 people for a year has been destroyed.
Despite this sudden devastation, U.S. officials said the spraying created no lasting harm, and many agreed it was helping turn the tide on the Viet Cong.
What they're doing amounts to a pretty important form of conservation in itself, the saving of American lives.
But the communist North Vietnamese presented a different picture of Agent Orange, one that became increasingly horrific as time wore on.
North Vietnam charged today that defoliants have produced many instances of miscarriages, congenital defects, and monstrosities among children.
The U.S. government initially dismissed these charges as communist propaganda, but following a study that linked dioxin, a contaminant in Agent Orange, to birth defects in laboratory animals, the spraying of this herbicide was discontinued in 1970. The herbicide was also eventually banned in the U.S. That did not stop the growing concern about Agent Orange, which took a new turn a few years after the last American soldier had left Vietnam in 1975.
Milton Ross, a Special Forces advisor near Pleiku, has a son born without the tips of his fingers.
Frank Moore is nearly dead from cancer. He thinks the cancer was caused by chemical defoliants he was exposed to as a soldier in Vietnam.
Thousands of Vietnam veterans think Agent Orange is now killing them. More than 1,300 Vietnam vets have filed claims for Agent Orange contamination. Not one has been honored.
We want an investigation of the Veterans Administration. We want the American people to listen to us.
The Vietnam veterans, for years, were screaming for attention.
Thousands of Vietnam veterans were supposed to be represented in court. Against 7 chemical companies, there was an out-of-court settlement.
Over the next 6 years, the fund will pay out at least $250 million to veterans and their families, including children not yet born.
This was only a partial victory.
None of this, say the defendants, means an admission of their liability for their veterans' injuries.
Agent Orange was a safe product when it was used in the Vietnam War, and it's a safe product today.
But the veterans continued to fight and gain ground. In 1990, the Veterans Administration released a sharply critical report, which found that even if the scientific studies lacked consensus, there was enough evidence to compensate veterans for Agent Orange claims. Another announcement from the VA followed closely behind.
With today's decision, the government admits for the first time Agent Orange may well have caused cancer. In this case, a rare form called soft tissue sarcoma.
The government has now agreed to pay $8 million a year to veterans.
Vietnam's American veterans were finally making headway in their long battle against Agent Orange. In a poor country like Vietnam, where people confront a multitude of health issues, it was hard to figure out exactly what had caused the birth defects exhibited by its children. But the Vietnamese government insisted the cause was Agent Orange.
Although that war was long ago, there is lingering anger about the United States' use of a controversial defoliant spread by American aircraft on the jungles there.
An epidemic of birth defects, brain damage, and rare cancers still affecting hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese today.
According to environmental studies, high levels of dioxin could still be found in the soil in certain areas and had seeped into nearby lakes.
But, people have access to the lake. Dioxin is contained in the fatty tissue of fish and duck, and there was a high level of dioxin in people's blood sample.
6 years later, in a joint project, the U.S. government began cleaning up the first Agent Orange hotspot at the Da Nang airport. At the airport, where Agent Orange was once stored, they've just completed building what amounts to a massive concrete oven. Contaminated soil was put inside and will be cooked for several months under immense heat. Scientists say the process will finally render it harmless. The system was just switched on this April. But many more contaminated sites remain in Vietnam. And back in the U.S., while most veterans are now covered for 14 illnesses presumed to be related to Agent Orange exposure, some veterans are still trying to get those benefits. The fight over Agent Orange continues.